Good afternoon and welcome to the Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting. Today is Tuesday, June 19th. We will call this meeting to order and start off first with City Council open discussion. Anything for open discussion? Okay, seeing none, I will move on to our first presentation, Falls Park Safety Review. Director Kearney, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. City Council members, Don Kearney with Parks and Recreation. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to present the Falls Park Loss Control Special Review to you today. But before I begin, I wanted to acknowledge the good work of Mike Hall and Regan Smith, Chief Goodroad and Chief Burns, Karen Leonard, our acting city attorney, and then Mike Patton and Kelby Maris of our office, and their respective teams for coming up with the recommendations that we will present to you today. They are here in support of the presentation and certainly try to answer all your questions that you have. We also have retained outside legal counsel, James Moore, to prepare today's report and also the PowerPoint presentation that we'll walk through today. James has extensive experience representing state and local government entities and has represented the city of Sioux Falls in many civil cases. He's also been retained by the South Dakota Public Assurance Alliance for the last 15 years to handle government liability claims involving counties, municipalities, and states. He's a shareholder with Woods Fuller, Schultz, and Smith, where he's practiced law since 1991. And James is listed in the Best Lawyers in America and Chambers USA, and he's also a member of the American Board of Trial Advocates. So with that, I'll turn it over to James, and we'll get started with the presentation.
Thank you. It's my privilege to be here today. I just want to address briefly the scope of my work. It's not correct to say that I am the author of the recommendations before you today, other than to the extent that I wrote the written report that went online yesterday, and I put together the PowerPoint that I'm going to walk through with you today. I was part of the overall risk review with respect to the most recent drowning that occurred in March of this year, but I am not a subject matter expert with respect to the recommendations and many of the issues that occurred directly as a result of that review. So I don't want to understate my role, but I don't want to overstate it either. In some ways, I'm a scrivener, and I was privileged to help facilitate the process of putting this report together. So with that being said, I want to walk through the highlights of the report for you, starting with just an overview of Falls Park. It's one of 80 parks within the jurisdiction of Sioux Falls Parks and Recreation. Obviously, it's a big one, 123 acres. It is open pretty much all the time, 365 days a year from 5 a.m. to midnight. The people who keep track of such figures and try to estimate them guess that there are 700,000 visitors annually to Falls Park. Over $10 million in capital improvements were made to Falls Park over the last 3 decades. So the city has spent a lot of money in creating what is one of the state's leading tourist destinations. And not to miss the obvious, the attraction of Falls Park is the river and the falls, with a lot of native quartzite and precipices and rocks and rushing water. The falls are the attraction, and the falls are obviously the risk. Just for context, there's a very nice aerial that's included here that shows the entirety of Falls Park. The area that is specifically in question with respect to the recommendations and the most recent drowning that occurred in March of 18 is located just in this slide above the pedestrian bridge by the Overlook Cafe, and that's the point that we'll be talking about in a little bit more detail. With respect to the review process that occurred, this was basically a special process that was instituted after the drowning on March 18 of 2018. The participants included all of the people that Director Kearney already mentioned, and I participated in that process initially by attending a meeting, at that time having been retained by the South Dakota Public Assurance Alliance as the city's essentially insurer. I was later retained directly by the city for the purpose of writing up the report that is the culmination of that risk review process. But there were a lot of conversations by the folks who are listed here that ultimately led to the recommendations that I was not necessarily a part of. That group reviewed the most recent history of incidents at Falls Park, and specifically at drownings, because that was the most recent incident. And the question was, what have we learned from this incident, and how does it relate to previous drownings, and what is there that we can do to address that more? There was also discussion about all the previous reviews that the city has undertaken with respect to Falls Park and the risk management efforts there, and also a look at what other governmental entities that have jurisdiction over similar falls or rivers have done with respect to safety. There were no concerns raised during that process with respect to the response by especially Sioux Falls Fire Rescue to the drowning incident on March 18. The response was really incredibly fast. Sioux Falls Fire Rescue was on site within 6 minutes of being called, and the victim was out of the water within 9 minutes of their arrival at Falls Park. So that was not an issue that we identified in any way as part of the review process. And then the process, as I said, culminated in the preparation of the report that went online yesterday. With respect to the drowning history, again, this is indicated in the report. There are 7 incidents here involving 8 people who have drowned dating back to 1982. You'll notice that there are long stretches, a couple of 12-year periods where there have been no drownings at Falls Park. You'll notice that this history does not include all of the rescue calls that have been made that have not resulted in a drowning, but where someone has been on the rocks or someone has actually been rescued from the water and did not drown. There are many of those beyond the incidents that are indicated here, but my observation is that there's no clear pattern from these incidents until the most recent drowning in March of 2018, and there was some connection that was made to the incident in March of 2013 because of the location and the occurrence of the foam at that location that builds up to 20 or 30 feet high and is in some sense an attraction, which is what was discovered in the most recent incident. The reviewing group considered a lot of possible actions that the city could take, and there were a lot of measures that were considered but ultimately not recommended. One of them is to staff Falls Park with dedicated parks officers. The principal problem with going down that route is that there's no ordinance for the officers to enforce. It is not illegal, it is not contrary to city ordinance to be on the rocks near the river. And so officers can do little in that situation except advise people to be careful, which is something that I think people are already aware of and already advised of by signage. Another option is to install permanent fencing. The problem here is, one, it's impractical given the terrain and the nature of the facility. This drawing shows what it would be like to actually try to fence the river in Falls Park. It's almost 1 mile of fence. A lot of it would be located on, would have to be located in granite. So it seems to be very impractical. It's a deterrent, but it's also an obstacle to first responders, and in some circumstances there's concern that it might impair rescue efforts. There was conversation about placing rescue devices in the park, something that could be thrown to someone who's in the river or trapped on the rocks. First responders have concerns about that for a couple of reasons, one of which is somebody who's safe on the rocks amidst the falls might be better off waiting there safely until a first responder who's professionally trained in how to rescue them can arrive and provide help, rather than having some bystander throw them a device which they reach out to grab and all of a sudden they're in the river where they weren't before. That kind of issue is the concern with placing rescue devices. The related concern is where to put them, and there was some conversation about putting them in the same location where anchors have been located throughout the park for the use of first responders. Those anchors are not advertised to the public. There's some concern that if we make their location well known, that they might become obstructed in some way and so not available for use by first responders. So that's not ultimately recommended. There was conversation about controlling the amount of water that runs through Falls Park through controlling the diversion dam gate, but essentially the city is already doing that. Further changes, there's nothing to indicate that that would be successful or make a difference, and it would require the approval of the Corps of Engineers. There was discussion about, is there some kind of chemical that we can use to control the amount of foam in the river? The practical answer to that is no, given the volume of water that flows. There is a chemical that is used by Sioux Falls Fire Rescue. It has not been used in the context of a rescue like this, but you would have to inject it into the water. While it's injected to the water, it might reduce the level of foam that's present, but that would occur only as long as it were being injected, and you have to have equipment on site to do the injection, and that's going to take time, and it's probably simply not practical in a rescue situation. And then there was discussion about adopting a formal Falls Park closure policy, where the city could actually, through a recommendation from the Director of Parks and Recreation, suggest to the mayor that Falls Park be closed because of high water levels, because of other unsafe conditions, because of high foam levels, whatever the case may be. The concern about doing that is one, it hasn't been done before. Two, it would be extremely difficult to enforce. Somebody has to be present to make sure that people are not in Falls Park under those circumstances, which, given the size of it, would be practically challenging. It's overly restrictive because there are other things as recommended here that can be done to address this particular risk, and no doubt it would be unpopular. So with respect to the recommendations, the first one for discussion is construction of what we've referred to as the Lower Falls Viewing Area, and that is a proposal that has been put together principally by Mike Patton, who's a landscape architect with the Department of Parks and Recreation, and I'm going to yield to him to explain specifically what has been drawn and proposed.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you, Mike Patton, Sioux Falls Parks and Recreation. So, in addition to everything James just said, our department tried to take somewhat of a more holistic approach to trying to understand why people are drawn to this area. And really what we came up with is pretty simple observation, is it's an interesting location. It has unique views to both upstream and downstream of the lower falls that you can't find anywhere else. And in the situation of the lower falls area to the north, south, the view itself is almost framed by both sides of the bedrock ledge and the pedestrian bridge itself. So it's an area that is always going to draw people's interest. The natural features of the rushing water and the foam and the rock outcroppings are interesting, and people are going to always be attracted to that type of location. We also tried to think about when people are there. And unfortunately, they're there when the water's really high, because that's when it's most interesting to be there. So when we tried to develop the concept that we're going to propose to you today, we took a situational approach that would be, how can we make some improvements to this area? One, improve the safety, mitigate the risk of danger, but also still allow people and visitors to the park to enjoy and observe this location. The design itself is really pretty simple. Switch pages. The goal is to create a couple of viewing platforms at key locations where people can enjoy this place, but enjoy it safely. They'd be connected by connective pathways made out of concrete. We'd also install a railing system to help discourage people from getting too close to the foam and the danger itself. The timeline is pretty aggressive. If the council's, in approval of this concept, we'd like to come forward in July for your approval using supplemental appropriations. We'd look to design right away afterwards and hopefully construct the site improvements this fall. Because the railing system is something that's going to take some time to manufacture and install itself, the railing system would probably be done over the winter months and installed as soon as possible in the spring. Knowing that sometimes early spring runoff can create a dangerous situation down there. It's important to note that the site itself would be fenced off with temporary construction fencing until the railing system is in place. And that's it. So I'll turn it back to James. Thank you.
The other recommendations that are included in the report are first, additional signage. There's already really good signage available at Falls Park. These signs have been reviewed by multiple risk managers, and no one has had suggestions for what might constitute a better sign. There are 10 of them located throughout the park. It's hard to get close to the water coming into the park and not see one. And as you can see, the primary cautions there are slippery rocks, no swimming, and it is illegal to swim in the river, by the way, but it's not illegal to be on the rocks. Turbulent water and supervision of children, and that's stressed, and they're available in English and available through pictograms so that everyone has an opportunity to understand them. The signs are located. The red stars show the locations of the current signs. The group recommends adding 2 more signs at the top on the north side where they're shown in green as again, possible entrance points to the park where someone would have an opportunity to see a sign when they first come into the park. Whereas it's hard to come into the park and get to the river without going past another sign, but these are just additional locations where you can catch somebody right away. We clearly thought that adding more signs than this is probably saturation, and at some point you reduce their effectiveness by having too many of them. In addition to additional signage, there's a possibility of doing some additional third-party risk assessment. There are risk management professionals that the city could contract with who would serve as an independent, objective reviewer, come in and look at Falls Park with a fresh eye. That is something that is recommended for your consideration. We discussed the possibility of removing the Lowhead Dam, which is further upstream from the location where the most recent drowning occurred. The state of South Dakota has long identified Lowhead dams as a drowning risk, and while the Lowhead Dam did not play any role directly in this incident, it's something that should be considered given that we're addressing drowning risks here and the Lowhead Dam presents its own drowning risk. There was also some conversation that removing the dam should reduce the level of water in the river at the location where this incident occurred. So it might reduce the drowning risk. It might make it easier for first responders to address an incident in this location. But that is very hypothetical at this point. It is simply a recommendation that that's something that the city further investigate and consider. And lastly, we talked about all kinds of technologies that are available, from essentially sorts of invisible fencing to all kinds of applications for your telephone that can provide warnings, and applications that you can get through the Visitors Center, and other technological advances that right now we don't have any specific evidence that they would be successful or particularly impactful, but the area is ever changing, and as that technology continues to develop, it's something that we think that Parks and Rec and the city's risk manager should keep an eye on and be prepared to bring back for approval if there's a specific technology that it looks like it might be helpful. So that, in essence, is an overview of the written report, and I think that everyone here who's participated in this process is available to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. We'll turn it over to the council for questions. Are there any questions in regards to the report? Councilor Sale.
Thank you. I wonder if we could get Chief Goodrow to give us a quick overview of what they currently do as far as their rescue operations. changed since I was there when they first tied a 3/4 inch manila rope around me and threw me in the water?
Right.
So-
Probably has changed some since then. There's a various ways to rescue people from the falls, and it all depends on the situation. So if they're stuck on rocks, sometimes they'll jump from a higher rock to a lower rock and they're afraid to jump back. That's simply a ladder, and then you secure them, go get them, bring them off there. Sometimes they are in the upper falls where they end up on a rock, kind of half in the water, half on the rock. So again, we secure our own rescuers, bring them out, and then make sure they're secured, bring them back. Sometimes they're in deeper water, so if it's farther downstream, more where that Lowhead Dam is, if there's a deeper water there, we can have rescue boats in there. We can secure the boats and bring those up to the Lowhead Dam or above it. There's a couple different kinds of boats that we have. Sometimes we have rescue divers that are they're surface divers, not subsurface, so they're on the surface, and they can come in the water, secure themselves, and search the best they can with longer tools to reach towards the bottom. So again, there's different ways, but it just really depends on the situation that you have in front of you when you get there.
Just one more question. We listed the drownings there. Do you have any count on the rescues that you performed over the same period of time outside of the classic Craig Crable?
We did
famous?
not. It could be hundreds, because those just aren't in this report where there's an actual drowning. It happens often. And when I'm talking going back all the way to 82 when they were started to look at this. So, yeah.
Counselor Stelberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure who these questions will go to. We just got a couple. When looking at the overview here, when you say 10 million in capital improvements over the last 3 decades, do we have any idea how much of that, what percentage or the amount that's gone to related to safety improvements?
That's probably done.
I don't know that I have a really good answer for you there, but some of the things I would point out is safety related to the viewing platforms that we have there and the interpretives, where we have the round shaped viewing platforms with the railings on them to strategically place those so that people can view the unique features of the falls and the exciting features of the falls, but yet do it at a safe distance. So that's one of the things I would identify. But if you wanted more detail as far as specific safety-related items, we'd probably have to do some digging.
Just wondering if we had a general idea, so, okay. So this Lower Falls viewing area, the platform and railing project, it was kind of smaller print on this. Can you remind me what we're looking to start that? The recommendation was start at when and it'd be finished by when?
The recommendation, knowing the high interest in this Falls Parks loss review, was really try to address the foam issue. I think that's one of the things we along with many others, identified as something that especially little kids are attracted to, and we really think that that's a potentially good solution and something that we, with the support of the council, would like to move forward as soon as possible, realizing that we currently don't have funding in our budget, but certainly would like to explore advancing that project so that we could get it bid out and start construction about that October timeframe, get the concrete walkways as well as the retaining wall where the railing would go on constructed this fall. And then, as Mike said, most of the time those railings are measured on site once the concrete retaining walls are poured, because it'll be go into the top of that retaining wall, and then those would get installed next spring. Ideally, it's before the spring runoff when the foam comes back up. But at a minimum, we would have that entire area fenced off that we plan to install the railing, and then also the fencing that goes beyond the railing that's pointed out in the graphics. So ultimately, by April of next year, we would hope that this project would be done, and people would be able to experience it, because one of the other things that our staff would tell you is that the area that we're talking about fencing off, people love to take selfies in those locations, love to take pictures. And so it's an attractive place, as Mike said, because there's a lot of features there that people are drawn to, but this would allow them to do that in a safe manner versus scaling the rocks and potentially getting into trouble.
Right, no, it sounds like a great idea. One other one if I can.
Go ahead.
So there are 10 signs right now, and they do look to be, they are pretty good sized. What again was the philosophy on the two that will be added? Is that, or did I see like when you're getting out of your car now, getting out of your car and as you're walking in? That's what they were,
Yeah, I think we just took another look at where we added signs the last time from 2013, and we thought, is there any other way somebody could walk into this park and not see one of those signs? And so those were a couple other areas that we identified that it's possible. And so we thought, why not, for the cost of a couple signs, it's a good measure to put up a couple extra ones so that you have to walk by one of those signs when you enter the park.
okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Counselor Staley.
Thanks. I have several questions. I'll start, and then I will let Councilor Neitzer take over. So, first of all, back to the signage. If I could give a suggestion, I agree. I did drive down there after this happened, and I didn't count the 10 signs, but I'm trusting that you're saying that they're there. But I would suggest a different color, and I would suggest having the sign actually by the dog waste sign, so it's a little closer to the ground, so it is easier to see. And I thought I had heard that there was some talk about putting a sign specifically that says dangerous foam or something. Did I hear that right? Are we talking about more of these signs, or it would have a different messaging?
Yeah, that's a good question. The foam signs, I think we envisioned those going near where the foam forms versus actually coming into the entrance of the park, and so potentially along the railings. And you probably noticed that in the report as well, is that we would have supplemental signs that would be much smaller, but basically on the railings along the viewing platforms.
Excellent. And then, okay, so next one is that how you're talking about that Lowhead Dam. How many deaths have we even had at that dam? Or is this more of a perspective thing that we're talking, it could happen? Because I don't remember seeing that we've actually lost people at that location.
Yeah, I defer to Chief. I think he's probably more interested in the recovery efforts along those lines, but I defer to Chief Goodroad.
Yeah, I don't recall us having an incident right there on that. I know we've had different incidents, but as far as a death right there, I don't think that we have. We were just looking at it from generally when you look at Lowhead dams, the state knows and people know that that's a hazard.
Okay.
It's right there and it's in the park.
Yeah, I didn't
so,
think that, okay. And then one more right now for Director Kearney. What's this, tell us the plan for the fresh eye. Because we're talking about, he said, a fresh eye, and how does that tie in? Because we're already going forward with something, and then are we going to have someone else come in with a fresh eye and then maybe tell us something else, or how are we proceeding onward here?
Well, I think there are a few companies out there that do loss control and safety inspections and evaluations of facilities, and I think it really depends on the level of comfort you have with our proposed plan and recommendations on whether you believe that additional review is necessary and is something that the council would like to proceed forward with. It's just a belt and suspenders kind of approach to reviewing the safety of Falls Park, and if you wanted to take another look at it by some independent third party, you certainly could, and it's just another consideration for the council.
Okay, and I have a few more, but I will.
Counselor Neitzer.
My question is right along those lines. As I read the report and I watched, I believe it was a media briefing, it might have been yesterday morning, there was discussion about the council could engage an outside consultant, and I'm not sure who I would address this question to, but my question was, would their scope be different, or would that be where we would get some other information, or would this be just if we wanted to get a third-party validation, I guess, of what you're suggesting in your findings? I mean, it's kind of weird asking you, considering it be an outside opinion of your opinion, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Yeah, I don't know that we've gone that far with regard to what the scope of a independent third party would be. But again, if there's something particularly that you would like us to look at or engage that third party in, we'd certainly be willing to do that. I think it was just, we wanted to be on the table. We're trying to be inclusive of any and all ideas, and it was something you as a council felt like it would be a good idea. We certainly could entertain that and proceed down that path.
Okay, thanks.
Do you have a follow-up, Counselor Neitzer?
No.
No? Okay. Counselor Staley? Counselor Kylie, sorry.
Thank you very much. Oh, I was a little slow. My fault.
Taking bids here.
I am interested in the construction of the Lower Falls viewing areas because, as I do believe that that would help direct them from the most dangerous area and would help to contain them or confine them better. So I do believe that's a good approach, regardless of what a future study might point out. Number one, it's going to further enhance our park, so I think it's a good investment. And I am in favor of a third-party risk assessment because I do believe having another set of eyes on this would be helpful and maybe the prudent thing to do, considering we've had a couple incidents in the last 5 years now. And even if it just simply confirms what we have already done internally, I think it's still good to have that confirmation. It certainly demonstrates to the public that we're doing everything that we possibly can to assure their safety. The Lowhead Dam, I do have a question about why that was constructed in the first place. Was it to raise the water level for aesthetic purposes? Is there some other functional need to prevent erosion downstream, or can anybody tell me that?
We believe it's been there for a long time. We're not sure whether it had something to do with the industry that was in Falls Park at that time to try to raise the water level for that purpose. But just know there are other Lowhead dams on the Big Sioux River that allow the water to pool to make it good for canoeing and kayaking and a variety of other purposes. But I think it's, as the chief pointed out, they're known as drowning machines. Once you get in them, you just spin around and you can't get out of them. And so that's one of the reasons why we threw that in there as something that we should maybe take another look at as well.
Well, I would agree, because in this case, it's certainly not going to impact the water above the falls.
Right.
And between the falls and the Lowhead Dam is not probably the best place for canoeing and even kayaking, even though we might have some adventurous folks out there that would like to give it a shot. But I would think for rescue purposes, if we can bring that water level down, that would be, might prove to be helpful. And the use of the various technology, that might be another area where we could get even more bang for our dollar too, depending upon what is out there, whether it's the development of apps or the safety video that might be used in the visitor center. Of course, that requires somebody to go into the visitor center, but I do believe that that's something that's fairly economical approach to it as well. So that's it. Thank you.
Anyone else before I go to Councilor Starr?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Don, I guess the thing that I'm concerned about, I think we're very well covered on the loss control part of this. I'm concerned we're not on the risk assessment. And I feel really strongly that before we make an investment and add additional features to the park, which I think are very well would enhance our park, that we do need that third-party assessment of what we're doing. We haven't done it from a group that's their job, and I think we need that assessment at this point before we get real aggressive in spending hundreds of thousands of dollars that could potentially not be in the right place and in the right design of what we're trying to accomplish to make it as safe as possible. So I guess that's where I'm at this point. So more of a statement than a comment or a question.
Councilor Staley?
Thank you.
Oh, so this is in addition. Don, how long would it take to get that third-party assessment? Why couldn't we kind of get that in there before we move forward?
Yeah, I might defer to the rest of the team if they have any additional information on that. Maybe.
Okay, they can be thinking about that. Can I ask another question while they're thinking about it, though, as long as you're up there?
Sure.
Okay, so I want to go back to your drawing. And by the way, I put this on Facebook as well, but I say bravo. I say bravo. I've been asking for this. I think that foam is a dangerous situation, and so I'm very happy we're moving forward. However, it wouldn't hurt to get that extra information about the assessment. But I wanted to get the details. I'm looking at this. If you could bring that up, the proposed fencing. Now, am I understanding this right, that this is going to be actually quite a long, so all the area in black is all going to have some kind of a railing, is that right?
Yeah, there'll be a railing on top of a retaining wall in the area adjacent to the viewing platforms and the sidewalks that are along there. And then there would be a fence on the top of the knoll that's there which leads down to the river. So at the end of the fence is really where it kind of just dies back into the side of the hill. So
Oh, if someone was to climb over that, because when you go right on that area right by past that fencing, it goes down pretty steeply. So we would hope that people wouldn't be climbing over that and standing on those rocks, correct?
yeah, and I think we got to be really clear about the fact that it doesn't prevent somebody from still scaling these walls. It doesn't prevent somebody from going around the fencing. Doesn't prevent them from getting in trouble at the upper falls. But the area that we know where the foam congregates, that is the area that we're focused on in the recommendation.
And I'm hearing on Facebook from people, they're very concerned that this is going to be hindering a view of the falls. And it looks to me, if we've got viewing platforms, it's going to be no different than the other areas where we have people able to stand out a little bit and look down, correct?
Yeah, that's the intention.
Now, so the second thing I wanted to ask about, and I want to make a statement because you had, one of the proposals was that we fence off the entire falls. And I've never been an advocate of saying the whole falls should be fenced off. I see you had that down as something that couldn't work. I don't think anyone ever said that we should have a fence around the entire falls. So just to clarify that. And then with the foam itself, now I've heard different kinds of reports about the quality of danger in as far as bacteria in that foam. Is that true that you would tell people do not touch the foam, just like we're telling people not to swim in the river, correct? So
That's correct.
would you say that foam could be potentially dangerous as far as bacteria?
Well, I can tell you what our environmental team says the reason why it occurs is because of the phosphorus in the water and then the agitation of the falls that creates the foam. Now, whether it's dangerous, I don't know. I personally wouldn't consume it, obviously. Or
Consume it, but it would have the same texture, wouldn't you think, the same makeup as the water itself? It's coming out of the water, so...
I would imagine so.
So that...
But that's beyond my technical expertise.
Right, but I mean, I think that's good too, so kids don't go up there and start scooping up the foam and throwing it on top. I mean, it's not something that is like splashing around in a swimming pool.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't recommend it.
Okay. And then if you want to give me an answer to that timeline.
Karen Leonard, acting city attorney. We did vet out the cost of what that proposal might be. It might be $15,000 to $20,000 to have a third-party risk assessment done, but we haven't contacted the firms to check their availability. I think we could have it done by the end of the year, but we would work to try to do it sooner if the council wanted that, but I don't have that information right now.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I have one question for Chief Goodroad. My question is in regards to the fencing that is done from the walking bridge all the way around. We obviously heard that it will deter people, and in most cases, I mean, it's going to deter children. They're not going to run off and run down there. My question is how does this impact rescues? I know we've heard issues in the past that we don't want to fence anything off because it's going to impact rescues of getting our equipment and being able to get to someone as quickly as possible, potentially save them instead of having a death. And so I'm curious on how that is, if there's a gate or if there's something that will be able for you guys to get down below quickly.
Right, when we were reviewing that, we talked about a gate, we talked about that fence being separate, and we looked at if you have kids on that pathway, you want that fence to be out there a ways so that they can't just slip, over there and be past everything. As far as the rescue itself, it's open on that north end, so on the right side there as you look at it. We would have real good access from that side, from the other side. It really wouldn't impede that much, right there, because we have that space around to get around it.
Right.
Which is different than fences everywhere.
Right.
Right.
Is this, and I don't pay attention enough to know, but is this, and I'm not a big fisherwoman myself, is this a hot fishing area that people are going to come around the side and want to fish in this area, or how is that?
Don might answer that better, but from what I understand, there's a lot of people that fish right in that spot. And I think that it's farther down, so I think where that fence ends, there's still plenty of room to get around to that point and fish down there.
Because we saw one of the deaths was the 13-year-old boy was trying to save his fishing pole. I mean, my son's 13. I can relate to that. I mean, he jumped into the lake after his fishing pole before. And so it's certainly something that somebody does quickly to try to get it, not thinking. So I wasn't sure as far as the impact are the fishermen and women going to come around that way,
right,
or not? But
I understand they fish all the way up and down that now, and with this in place, it would limit that to the most dangerous area. They wouldn't be able to access that.
Try to determine, yeah. Thank you. Any other questions as we move to the next item? Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I know this has been a long time coming, that we've really been looking forward to this report and this information. I know that we'll continue the conversation, and it sounds as if there's a desire on the council to move forward with some sort of third-party review of the risk assessment. And so if you could get additional information to the full council on that, we would appreciate that, to see what are the next steps, what are the costs, how does that come about. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Our next item is planning and building services, and that item has actually been rescheduled to a meeting in early July. So we are going to move on to letter C, which is Southeastern Council of Governments overview. Lynn Keller Forbes, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Lynn Keller Forbes, Executive Director of the Southeastern Council of Governments. I also serve as the Executive Director of the Southeastern Development Foundation and Dakota Business Finance. Councilor Starr sits on my board and asked me if I would come down and give, especially the new ones, some update on kind of some of the things that we have going on at CCOG, some of the organizations that we run, because he was impressed by how many other things that we were into just other than planning and zoning. So we are one of 6 planning and zoning and planning and development districts in the state. We were created in 1970 under an executive order by Governor Frank Farrar. So I have served as the executive director of CCOG since 2001, and we have those 6 southeastern counties there that we serve. We operate under a joint cooperative agreement between the 6 counties and also the 4 first-class municipalities that we work with. We have 40 communities in 6 counties, and it's voluntary membership, and they all are members of CCOG. We don't have any taxing authority. We're not like a water development district or anything like that. Just to give an idea for revenues, now this does not include the pass-through revenues. These would just be internal revenues, but we had about $1.6 million in revenues. About 44% of that comes from us operating the Southeastern Development Foundation's Regional Revolving Loan Fund and Dakota Business Finance. You'll see that dues only make up 17% of that. We took in about $283,000 in dues in 2017. A vast majority of that comes from the first-class municipalities, 44% of that. 33% comes from the counties. And then our second and third-class municipalities, who probably use our services more than anyone else, make up 23% of that. We do a lot of infrastructure applications, water, sewer, storm sewer. We do a lot of applications for streets, community centers, senior centers, fire halls, things that you would heard or you've heard if you've sat on this council for a while. Your SRF, State Revolving Loan Fund applications would fall under that. CDBG applications, rural development applications, all of those kinds of things. In 2017, we assisted our communities with securing over $30 million in grants and low-interest loans. I've got those kind of listed out for you by different sources, and you can see that we're working with a vast amount of federal and state partners to secure those dollars. If you compare that to the dues that are paid and what was secured back, there was a return on investment of $105.55 for every dollar that was invested in the organization. All my counties, when I do this, kind of like to see what's going on in our county and what did you get last year for our county. Since you're split between Lincoln and Minnehaha County, I've just kind of highlighted both of those. But of that $30 million, approximately 21 or 22 million of that occurred in Lincoln and Minnehaha counties. When we count your dues, we count you just in Minnehaha County. So of the dues that were paid, again, the ROI on that would have been $110.64. We also are involved with assisting with comprehensive plans, zoning ordinances, municipal ordinances, and subdivision ordinances through our land use planning. and that's also included in the dues as well. You have to understand that a lot of our second and third class municipalities obviously don't have full-time staff. They might have part-time staff. They have certainly part-time mayors, part-time city councils. So if they're faced with having to do an infrastructure project, it can be a heavy lift for them. So they would rely on us for that. And then in the same manner, if they had some sort of an ordinance they needed drafted, a lot of times they would rely on us to help them with that as well. We also serve as a coordinating entity for the MPO, which stands for Metropolitan Planning Area, or organization actually is what it stands for. And the requirement is by federal law, if you are in a city that is 50,000 or more, you have to have an MPO to do transportation planning. And we are the coordinating entity for that. It's actually governed by the UDC, and many of you have had an opportunity over the years to sit on that body that makes the decisions for planning. All of the funds do flow through CCOG for that. So we enter into a contract with the Department of Transportation, and then we subcontract with the cities and counties for those dollars. In 2017, there was about 1.1 million that was passed through, and the city of Sioux Falls ended up with over $1 million of that, which is understandable since you do a majority of the transportation planning. Your staff would work on that. You would see not only personnel services coming through there, but also you can pay for studies, transportation studies, the 26th Street corridor, or study if you're looking at interchanges, the 41st Street, some of those kinds of things that are going on right now. We also run the Southeastern Development Foundation. It was created in 2002 essentially to provide gap financing in conjunction with a bank. We have lots of banks in the city and around the surrounding area, but obviously they have their own constraints of what they can be involved with. And we want to make sure that there are projects that a lot of times they would like to be involved with, but maybe the collateral's just not there, and it would be a classified loan if they did it. So that's where we kind of become involved. We've been around for since 2002, and so we've done about $20 million in that amount of time. And they have a separate board that contracts with CCOG to provide that staffing. In 2017, we did 20 loans, or about $2.8 million, leveraged $14.3 million, 121 jobs created or retained. Again, I just looked and highlighted Lincoln and Minnehaha County. Of that almost $2.8 million, you guys are at over $2.2 million. And a majority of the loans that we're doing are going to be in around the Sioux Falls area. That's where the activity is. One of the loans that we did last year that I thought we were involved with actually that whole block. We were involved with financing the Stogies and the Bin 201, and then we were also involved with financing the Nybergs Ace. So if you talk about transformational on that one block, that was something that was fun to be a part of. We're also involved with affordable housing. There is, as you know, always a shortage of affordable housing. We got involved with this in 2015. And we've chosen not to do stick-built, but we've chosen to take advantage of the Governor's House program. These houses are built through the state of South Dakota at Springfield Prison. So it offers inmates a chance for them to learn a job skill. And then those houses are sold, and you can to low-income families throughout the state of South Dakota. We actually at CCOG sell the house for the South Dakota Housing. We sell it not only in our 6 counties, but also 5 counties that are north of us as well. Bless you. In 2015, we were given 4 lots by Minnehaha County. They had taken them back because of non-payment of taxes, and they were sitting there and requiring to be mowed and all the other things, and all they really wanted was us to get housing on them and get them back on the tax roll. And so we subdivided one of those lots into 2 additional ones. We ended up with 5 lots, and we put governor's houses on those. We then moved out to an area called the Grasslands, which is out by the new junior high school that's out on the northwest part of town and kind of in that area. This was a development that was started in mid-2000s. Started out with a thought that they would put manufactured housing on foundations, and then they would be able to secure permanent more conventional financing than they would if they were doing more modular financing. So we bought 23 lots out there. We did 9 houses the first year. We did 11 houses last year. This is the map of what we did last year. Basically, the governor's house is 1,200 square foot, 3-bedroom. You can also get a 2-bedroom, but we don't develop any of those. It has 2 bathrooms. We put all the appliances in it, so it's turnkey. We put a washer and dryer in it as well. We put it on a full unfinished basement with a 2-car garage. It is 2x6 construction. There's some confusion. This is not manufactured housing. This is energy efficient 2x6 6 constructed housing. It doesn't come in pieces. It's one house that gets moved here. I always tell people think about custom touch homes because I would say that's kind of similar to that as well. The price last year was $164,900, but actually $10,000 of that was a grant that we secured through South Dakota Housing, and so really the mortgage was $154,900, and that grant that they got was a second mortgage that was forgiven at $2,000 a year over 5 years. So if you live in your house for 5 years, then that went away completely. At the top is what the ones look like last year. They've done a redesign, so the one on the bottom is what they look like this year. They've added, as you can see, a little bit of a brick facade kind of thing and some vertical siding. They've also made some changes on the inside where they've gone away from oak. This is the oak they had now, and now they put in dark cabinets, and I think that'll be a really nice welcome change to upgrade them a little bit. Love the guys down at the prison, but interior decorating wasn't really one of their stronger points, so it was nice to see them get away from oak for a while. I'm just going to flash through some pictures so you can get an idea of what they're like on the inside. I don't know if you've ever been out to the fair. They usually have one out there, and you can usually walk through them. This is the main level bathroom. Here's the master bath, which is a 3/4 bath. This was kind of interesting, and I actually put this together, this slide, when I went down to talk to Minnehaha County to talk about the original lots they gave us and kind of the impact of how we've gotten into this as a nonprofit developer. And to give you an idea, we really didn't want to get into being a nonprofit developer, but on the Governor's House, they're limited to, if you are a for-profit developer, you're limited to making a 10% profit, and everybody in this town makes more than a 10% profit, so nobody wanted to develop Governor's houses. You're also restricted in who can buy them income-wise, so that somewhat puts more of a risk on the developer as well, and we really couldn't find anybody that was interested in developing these for us, which is how we ended up in the development business. But in 2015, we had 3 sales. In 2016, we had 7. In 2017, we had 14. 3 of those were kind of a carryover from 2016 that closed in early January. So all 24 of those totaled about $3.6 million in sales, which if you're doing this and you're not really paying attention, I just wasn't really paying attention to it. So to me, that was a pretty impressive number when I looked at it. More impressive, I tried to put into what does that mean in taxes? You're taking these lots that were, maybe being taxed at $400 or $500 a year, if even that, and now you've put a house on there and you put them on the tax roll. So I use conservatively about a 2% of the sale price to come up with what do I think that's generating in taxes. And the total impact of those 3 years of development we've done so far is an estimated annual tax impact of $72,000. Because I want to say we were having so much fun, but we'd really built out the lots we had originally. We decided that we would buy the additional lots that were still left out there. Lots are probably one of the toughest things to come by, especially for affordable housing in the city, and you can get into having a $40,000 or $50,000 lot pretty quickly, and if you want to put a house on it, that quickly makes your house not very affordable. So we bought the other 33 lots that were out there, and our plan is there's also another 7.7 acres. We bought that as well. That's actually laid out for another 24 lots, so we believe we have about a 6-year inventory if we continue to do about 10 lots a year. To give you kind of an idea of the household income, and I know this looks a little bit confusing, so I'm going to focus on the bottom 2 first. So if you wanted to buy a Governor's house and put it on a lot anywhere you wanted to go, the income limit is $49,910 if you're a single or an individual. If you want one of ours, because we have that extra $10,000 in them, then you're limited as a single person to the $44,100. And then if you're a family of 3 or more, it's $57,000. So what we're seeing is we sell a lot of these to single people, either young single professionals. We're selling a lot of them to single mothers. We're selling them if it's a family. Typically, obviously, one of the parents is usually not working. And so that's kind of what we're seeing out there for the most part. We also sell them to a lot of retired couples as well. For net worth, and there's a difference in whether you're 62 over or under that. If you're under that, your net worth has to be less than $90,000 and less than $70,000 in liquid assets. And then if you're age 62 or older, your net worth is less than $175,000, and you have to have less than $100,000 in liquid assets. So you see a lot of people that are retired that like to buy this, but if they've done any long-term planning, usually they're not able to buy them as well. Also run Dakota Business Finance, which is an SBA 504 program that primarily finances long-term fixed assets like buildings, and we can also finance long-term equipment, large manufacturing equipment, those kinds of things, and leasehold improvements. Unlike CCOG and the Southeastern Development Foundation, we're not just focused on those 6 counties. We're a statewide certified development company. And we also picked up Minnesota, Iowa, and some counties in Nebraska. That's not really our sweet spot. We're not out there doing a lot of marketing, but what we were finding is a lot of those areas are banked out of Sioux Falls, and our bankers are out there, and they're asking us to go with them. And so we ended up asking if we could extend our territory for that. Typical structure is the bank provides 50% of the financing. They take a first on the building. That's primarily what we're financing. Dakota Business Finance and SBA will provide 40% of the financing, and that is financed through the issuance of bonds. So this doesn't come out of Congress. This is an appropriation, any of those things. They issue bonds once a month. You don't know what your rate's going to be until your project actually funds. And then the best part of this program is obviously that the borrower ends up having 10% down. The 40% is actually, because it's a bond, it's fixed rate, so it's fixed for 20 years is typically what we used to do. Recently we had a change in the program where we can go out to 25 years. We've got a lot of borrowers that are interested in that. We did 37 loans last year. 36 of those were in South Dakota. One was in Minnesota, about $24 million. Leveraged another $42 million, and jobs created or retained were 352, and we worked with 17 different lenders to do those. A lot of lenders in this town, good people to work with. This just gives you kind of an idea of where are we at with everybody else in the state and how does that compare. Of the 66 loans that were approved last year in South Dakota, we did 36 of them. So we've been the #1 CDC in the state of South Dakota in all categories for the last 6 years. There it is if you compare them just in terms of dollar amounts and if you add all those together, and where were we. Some of the projects that we've been involved with doing 504s on, we were involved with the Keller Williams Realty Building, did a 504 on that. Again, I mentioned earlier the Nybergs Ace, which was a great downtown addition. Been involved with both the tires loans out there. They've got one for their building and then one for their equipment. And that's really all I have for you, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions for Lynn? Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I think probably I have more of a statement than anything. I've dealt a little bit with these, and I've showed them quite a bit. And you and I have talked a time or two over some of these. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about these homes, how they're built, just kind of the purpose of them. I mean, I've been through a number of them. I mean, for the money that you're paying for some of those, they're really fantastic. And especially when we're always talking about affordable housing and the shortage and the challenges, and I mean, you have something like this, right? I don't know, I certainly think there's still lots of potential there. I think that's what you're saying as well. So you'd said something and I didn't quite pick it up. You always tell people what in regards to governor's homes? You had made a comment and I didn't quite hear it. But
they're not manufactured homes.
Oh, is that? Okay, I did hear that.
There's a lot of misconceptions. In fact, when we first started developing these, we had some problems with some of the appraisers and how they wanted to assess them because they wanted to use manufactured homes as comps. And that's, that's night and day of what they are. And so we had to do a little bit of educating to get everybody up to speed on that. But yeah, I have no qualms about it. I've sold 2 of them to my nieces. I've got an employee that's bought one. I wouldn't have any, and anytime I see somebody graduating from college getting that first new job, I'm always telling them, this is probably would be a good thing for you to look at. In fact, now we have a list of people that come in and say, I want to be on the list, and so as we develop them and they become available, then we'll start kind of moving our way through the list and giving people choices of what's out there before we even put them on the MLS.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Councilor Staley.
I have 3 questions. First of all, I agree with Councilor Selberg that as you were talking about it, was like really reasonably priced. And I think I heard you say it's $154,000 at the end.
That's what they were last year. We haven't priced them this year. Of course, lumber has gone through the roof this year, so I expect a price increase somewhat due to that. And then with the redesign, the new houses are more expensive than they were last year. They've also added central air to those as well.
Right. So, they said like $5,000. Didn't I hear that?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. We haven't finished pricing them yet for this year.
So what did you say about after 5 years? Something?
Oh, of the 10,000. So we got a Housing Opportunity Fund grant from South Dakota Housing. And so what we do is we put a mortgage on, and we did last year, we had enough to do all 10 houses. We put a mortgage on each of those lots. And then as people close on them, it's a soft second. It just sits there. There's no interest paid on it. nothing like that. And every year that that person lives in there, it goes away at $2,000 a year. So if in year 4 somebody sold the house, they would have to pay back that $2,000. If they stayed until year 5, then they wouldn't have to pay back anything.
So this doesn't involve any sweat equity?
No.
This is just a straight sell?
Straight purchase.
Okay, then, and I'm just coming on your board, which will be kind of exciting, so thank you, Councilor Starr, for bringing her in. But as you're talking now, I'm needing clarification. It's sounding like you are kind of a lending agency, because so are you keeping a stash of cash on hand that you're giving, or are you just the pass-through for a financial institution?
Well, no, we're not. It kind of depends on the entity you're talking to. So if you're talking about Dakota Business Finance, the bank is providing 50% of the financing, and then that other 40% is coming from the sale of bonds. And so we're marketing the program, we're doing the underwriting, we're doing the closings and the servicings and all that, but those funds aren't funneled through us. If you're talking the Southeastern Development Foundation, we're essentially running our own small bank.
Okay, so you've got that financial
Yes.
pot of gold there. And then can you tell these communities and these counties you're mentioning, is every community in a county involved? Or
Yes, we have 100% membership.
do they have to be?
No. That's a voluntary membership, and so really we're judged every year on what are we providing for services and are they happy, because if they're unhappy, they don't have to be members, and we have 100% membership.
So let's say it's a little town like Garrettson.
Yep.
What would they pay in dues?
I want to say their dues are about $1,800 a year.
So is it based on population?
It is based on
Oh,
population.
okay. All right, thank you so much.
Yes, you actually picked one that I knew, so that was good.
Any other questions? Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you. Lynn, could you, I think the thing that is the most intriguing about CCOG for me is that we're able to get together as a region to promote both the region and the state. And so we talk about housing and governors' houses, but it's those other communities as well as Sioux Falls on how well we do helping provide that infrastructure in places where they can't provide a full-time staff. How does it benefit from the planning and pass-through of some grant applications that we work with the city of Sioux Falls? How does it benefit the citizens of Sioux Falls outside of the Governor's House programs and things? So, I mean, you kind of did that, but show me how that's, again, we're promoting the region, but how does that directly benefit Sioux Falls?
Well, anytime that you have good planned growth around you, you're going to benefit. I mean, a rising tide floats all boats. So if you have, you've seen it in Harrisburg, for example. As they've continued to grow, you obviously are having, there are people that are able to live out there but still work in the city of Sioux Falls. You want good planned development. You want somebody that's putting in the roads and putting in the infrastructure to be able to handle all of that. So it kind of goes back to what I said about the second and third class municipalities using our services probably more than anything else, but paying the least. They probably need it the most. Yet as the city continues to grow out, you have a lot of people like your workforce that's living in those smaller communities for whatever reason, and then we want to make sure that those communities are welcoming and that their infrastructure will be able to support that growth as well.
And our dues returns way more than we invest in our dues.
I'm glad you think that.
Thank you,
Councilor
I do.
Starr,
So.
thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? I have a couple, if not. First of all, thank you for being here. One of the things that Lynn didn't talk about as much, but has been a big advocate of is getting together different groups. I know we have tried to do a few different projects that maybe were resisted a little more than we had anticipated when we looked at the population of Sioux Falls being in 2 counties and servicing our citizens as far as having a place that you can go title your vehicle in the southern part of Sioux Falls. And who knew that would be so controversial? And unfortunately, we're not there yet, but I'm hopeful that we can continue that conversation to service the folks that live in the southern part of Sioux Falls in Lincoln County. Shouldn't be that difficult to get done, but we'll see. The other question I had, since we talked a lot about the governor's houses, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 years ago where we had a constituent come in front of us and talk about an issue they had with their governor's house. So my question is in regards to when an issue comes up, I believe it was in the Cathedral District or somewhere where there was foundation issues. So when issues like that come up, what are the solutions? What are the remedies? Has that been fixed, or is that still kind of a lingering issue out there?
So a couple of different issues, obviously. Whenever we hire a construction crew, They're licensed, they're bonded, they're insured. We work through the city of Sioux Falls. But things happen when you're building things. You guys have had those situations happen in your own event centers and some of those kinds of things. So, I mean, things happen when you build and you have constructions. The house comes with a 1-year warranty through the house itself that's built in Springfield. South Dakota Housing provides a 1-year warranty. So if anything goes wrong with that house structure in that first year, they would come send somebody out to come and fix that for you. We had subs, obviously, that put in that basement, and I can't say a lot more about that other than we're still working to resolve that issue.
Okay. I was hopeful that it was done, but I hadn't heard anything for a long time, so I figured it had maybe moved past that. But I respect your situation you're in, so I won't ask any further questions about that. Thank you for being here. And
Madam, could I ask one more thing?
Sure. Go ahead, Council.
Are there different options for housing, or is it just, do people get a choice, or is it just kind of a one?
So we only developed a 3-bedroom. The only alternative would be a 2-bedroom. These are really built kind of, I don't want to say assembly line, but they're really built so they can be mass produced by the prisoners. So you only get the 2 options. We looked at trying to do some stick building this year out there and price comparison wise, and couldn't come anywhere near to what we could do with this. There are different ways you can align them. You can run them, you know, depending on the size of your lots and where the garage should go and some of those kinds of things. But basically, they're turnkey. I don't like to sell them until I'm completed with them. I pick out all the floor coverings. I do all of that kind of stuff, and then we just kind of do a closing.
How about the outside? Is it just standardized
color? It is standardized, yes.
Permanent siding?
It's vinyl siding.
Vinyl.
Yep.
Any other questions? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We will move to our last presentation, Veterans Cemetery Update, Councilor Kylie. I know you have some guests here as well, so we will honor additional input by Ken.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much for this opportunity. Fellow City Council colleagues, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's my pleasure to present on this very worthy project. Many of you have already played key roles in this particular project, the South Dakota State Veterans Cemetery. All of you will be playing a key role in the coming weeks with this. And I'd also like to recognize a few individuals that are with us in the audience. Ken Tunison, who is sitting behind me, has been playing a key role in this. Ken and Terry Paulson approached Councilor Rolfing and myself almost 2 years ago now, so it's amazing how fast time has gone, about assisting them in finding property suitable for a state veterans cemetery. Before I get into that much further, I also want to recognize the city attorney's office has obviously played key roles in this. Our past Mayor Huther's office played a key role. Mayor Tenakin has already played a key role as recently as just a week ago with signing documentation. Director Cooper's department and Director Cotter's department, they've all had staff and personnel that have played very key roles in this. And I would be remiss to, if I were not to recognize Mr. Jim David, who has been with us every step of the way at every single meeting, and he has played a very vital role in this project as well, too. So let's move on, talk a little bit more about the South Dakota State Veterans Cemetery. First of all, when Ken and Terry approached us, they told Director Rolfing and myself that South Dakota, once again, is kind of lagging behind in the rear. We were just one of 5 states in the nation that did not have a state's veterans cemetery. The closest veterans cemetery is the National Cemetery in Sturgis, South Dakota, or Fort Snelling, Minnesota. And what makes that so problematic is of the 72,704 veterans in South Dakota, 50,000, over 50,000, nearly 51,000 of them reside in the East River. So as a result, many of our veterans were unable to really take advantage of a state veteran cemetery or a national veteran cemetery due to the distance that it involves. So veterans are eligible for free burial benefits, but rarely use them because of that distance and wanting to be buried close to where their loved ones live. Okay, a little bit more background about the State Veteran Cemetery. It has to have a minimum of a 20-year lifespan. And actually, we're going to exceed that with the gift that the city is prepared to make to the state. The cemetery must be operated solely for the internment of service members who die on active duty or veterans and their spouses and their dependent children. And I want to emphasize dependent children. So individuals that are 18 or over would be eligible if, for instance, they had special needs and still reside at home with mom and dad. So we'll talk a little bit more about that eligibility and the payment process involved. The state legislature must pass, in fact, they already have this past session, the necessary legislation authorizing the state and adopting the funds for establishment and operation of a state cemetery. So that passed through legislation, and we had some of our own Sioux Falls legislators that really led that effort in doing so too. So my hat goes off to them as well. Once final designs are approved, we'll have to allow 12 to 18 months for the construction. And Ken told me here earlier this afternoon that we already have 3 concept designs in the making too. Okay, the VA is authorized to pay a plot allowance of $749 to the state, because once we gift this, it becomes state property, for the expenses incurred in the burial of an eligible veteran without charge to that veteran. Now, there is a charge to the veteran's family if a spouse or a dependent child, and that charge would be that $749, but again, that would be up to the family to pay for that fee. The Veteran Cemetery Grants Program assists state governments in providing grave sites in an effort to satisfy veterans' burial needs. And so that's actually a federal program, and in this case, there is the potential for up to $6 million to be provided for the establishment of the state's veteran cemetery. So the timeline, this past February 5th, those of you that were serving on the council at that time were part of a unanimous decision to pass a resolution to convey city property. And as you know, a resolution is not binding, but it certainly showed that we were committed to do so. And this was key for our state legislators to move forward and show their fellow legislators that we are committed to making this happen. So then in March of 2018, the legislature did approve Senate Bill 91, and the governor signed it, and I and Councilor Rolfing was not able to attend, but Mr. Jim David were able to attend the signing of that. And so for this councilor anyway, that was one of my prouder moments. The April 2018, the VA pre-application was submitted to the state, so that happened just in recent months. And then also in April and May, the site survey has been conducted by state engineering. So that has just taken place. They went onto the property and actually conducted the site survey. And on June 12th of just last Tuesday, Mayor Paul Ten Aiken signed the Veterans Hills plat. So we are now referring to it as Veterans Hills plat, but that is not going to be the official name. That'll be up to the state to determine what the name of the state cemetery is eventually going to be. Then on June 14th, the Veterans Hills plat was signed by the Mapleton Township Supervisor, and that is because it resides outside of Sioux Falls city limits. It's actually in our Tier 3 growth area. City of Sioux Falls is projected from 31 to 40 to maybe reach this area. So it was necessary to have the Mapleton Township Supervisor sign off on the plat as well. And so that brings us today, June 19th, the City Council informational to bring everybody up to date. So if you're wondering where this property is, If you were to continue to drive north on 229, instead of taking the ramp to the east on Interstate 90, or the cloverleaf around to the west on 90, but you continued north, you'd go up to Slip Up Creek Road, which would be just about a mile north of Interstate 90, and then you would go east, and it would be within probably a half a mile and just to the north side of the Slip Up Creek Road. And so that shows or at least on your paperwork that you have, that shows the approximate location. And on our left actually shows the boundaries of the plat. And then on the right, there is another photo that gives you a little better idea of the topographical layout of the property. So if you're moving from the road west, you're actually gradually moving uphill. And once you do get uphill, you have a magnificent view of the city of Sioux Falls to the south. So it is going to be a beautiful area for a state veterans cemetery. Now going back to what I was stating earlier, so it took us a good year before we started to zero in on this property. We had contacted private developers. In fact, Councilor Rolfing and I spoke with Erica Beck when she did work with a private developer in town here, and she actually reached out to other developers to see if they had any property that might be suitable for a state veterans cemetery or had any ideas of any other potential property. Well, we really went through a checklist of possibilities before we decided and determined that the Slip Up Creek area, which was originally purchased by the city of Sioux Falls to create a reservoir to meet our water needs. When that was determined not to be feasible, now we have the property, and the area that has been planted is actually being farmed right now and has been leased to a private farmer, and that lease will continue through this year. So this is an example of a state veteran cemetery in Preston, Minnesota. So we've all seen pictures of Arlington National Cemetery. So the state cemeteries will follow a similar concept. They're rather grand and picturesque. The aesthetics are quite frankly very pleasing. And this is just an example. I'm not saying this is what ours is going to look like, but in talking with Mr. Tunison, there will certainly be an avenue of flags as you're moving into the property, and there's even some other possibilities as we're getting closer to the property as well. So the timeline going forward, July 3rd would be the first reading of the ordinance that officially gets approximately 60 acres to the state of South Dakota. And that has to be done in order for them to proceed with their application. So then on July 10th, we would have the second reading of the gifting ordinance. And as you know, that doesn't go into effect for 20 days. So on August 3rd, the ordinance actually becomes effective. And then on August 17th, it'll take approximately 2 weeks to close on the property because we are gifting this from the city of Sioux Falls to the state. So that closing, just like the closings that we've gone through with our own personal property, we'll have to go through something similar to actually complete the process. And that's estimated to be done around August 17th. So, which is just in time, 2 weeks prior to the application deadline for the VA application. So we are cutting it pretty close, but I'm confident that we can get there, with your help. So we're at that point of questions.
Well, thank you, Councilor Kylie, for your hard work in this. And I also would agree with you when you said that Jim David was vital to this. I'll tell you, he's vital to all of us. He's precious beyond gold.
There's no doubt about that.
Also, thank you to the two legislators, Larry Zickman and Jim Stalzer, who I know were very instrumental in working for this. So I've got a few questions. The road, if you take that, go forward and go north, is that road paved then as you're coming before you turn off to the east then, or what condition is that in?
It is currently from Interstate 90 north, that road is paved, and then for a short distance, maybe half a mile or less, as you turn to go east to the property, it is paved. That's been paved actually by the housing development that is there. And then from that point on, it is gravel and it is a township road.
So the city isn't going to have to put any money into the infrastructure of a street?
No,
at
this point, that has we have talked about the road and the possibilities. We've talked with the counties, we've talked with the state, and so we're still hoping that we can work out some things regarding the road. But the city does not have an obligation in that at this point in time.
And could that stay a gravel road then for a while? I mean, that rural area?
I am not aware of any requirements on the part of the national VA that road would have to be paved. At least in the last meeting that I attended, that topic came up, and none of us were aware of any requirements at that point in time.
Okay.
And Ken is still not aware of any developments at that point in time.
Then so people from Minnesota can be buried here as well? I mean, we would say state cemetery, but it's a national, could someone from Nebraska come in?
And that is my understanding, since South Dakotans could be buried in Minnesota, and I'll let Ken address that.
Good afternoon. Yes.
Ken, can you just state your name?
Any veteran from any state in the nation.
Ken, you're supposed to identify yourself.
Can you just state your name for the record?
My name is Ken Tunison from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Yes, any veteran in the nation or in the world that is a United States veteran can be laid to rest as long as the individual has an honorable discharge or a general discharge under honorable conditions.
Okay, then let's talk about logistics of the plots, because I buried several people, so I understand how this works. How many plots are going to be in this cemetery?
There's going to be 1,913 per acre.
What is that?
It's going to be 10 acres in the first development, and there will be 4 developments before it's completely full.
And did I understand that you're going to be marking these things out that everything is
It'll be pre-vaults installed before we start laying the rest.
So,
for a double vault or a single vault.
So how many vaults are you putting in the ground here? I mean, you're talking about 1,900 to start with, or are you doing the whole?
No, there will be a
40,000?
section of the double vaults, which is the veteran and the spouse can be laid to rest together. There will be a section with single vaults for individuals or veterans that want to be laid to rest by themselves. There will be a section for cremains, which is the remains of a cremated individual and buried in the ground, laid to rest in the ground. And there will be a columbarian wall where there will be niches for the urns for for the veterans to be placed in, and the spouses.
Are there going to be, so as this is being developed, somebody watching this, they're going to be seeing thousands of vaults being brought into this area?
There'll be according to the plan, there'll be 12 foot deep, and there'll be a pea gravel and drain tile placed, and then on top of the vault there'll be pea gravel, 8 inches of pea gravel, 4 inches of black dirt, and then sod. And then when a burial is required, the pea gravel, the vault, or the sand and black dirt will all be removed for that space, and the coffin will be lowered into the vault. If it's the second individual, the husband or the spouse that's going to be laid to rest, the first one will go on the bottom of the vault, the second one will go on the top.
Oh, so they're not going to be side by side?
Top, over, under.
Okay, and do people get, like, if somebody wants to have a place, can they reserve that ahead of time?
Yes, they can.
This is not, they don't have to wait till they've died. And then if they, how do you make?
Once it's open, then there'll be opportunity to go online and put in an application, and and complete the application, submit it, and then pick out a resting place.
What if there's two dependent people, then do they just keep getting stacked? Is it all on that one area, or it never goes this way?
No, they won't go side to side because the vaults are probably 6 inches apart from head to toe and 3 inches from side to side.
So if you had two dependent children, then I'm just pushing this here. Okay, so mom and dad have died, and then the two kids die, and you have four coffins.
That could be a possibility of two vaults side by side then.
There's flexibility then for the people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Counselor Neitzer? Oh, I'm sorry.
I think I heard this, but maybe you could clarify just kind of based off of the last question. If a veteran has a dependent, that dependent themselves does not serve and is over the age of 18, they would no longer qualify to be buried in the cemetery. It'd only be if they were a dependent, let's say a minor child. Is that
That is
correct?
my understanding, yes, Counselor.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
Counselor Sale?
Thank you. Counselor Kylie, what's the value of this land we're giving away?
That is today's value. I don't know that we had ever established that. And quite frankly, because this has just been platted, we've never really established the value of this property or what it would have cost us at the time that it was purchased. And was it back in the late 70s or 80s that it was actually purchased? 80s or 90s, but we could get that information.
I'm sure it's got to be on the books someplace as an
Oh,
asset.
yes. Counselor, or not counselor, but Director Cotter would certainly be the individual. I mean, we had addressed that, and at one point he had said that the system would just simply need to be made whole, but it would be made whole at what the original cost was back at the time of purchase, not at what today's value is.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I have one. Is there going to be a visitor center as you come in? Is there something as you enter the cemetery where there be some sort of visitor center, get more information, learn about maybe who's buried, learn about history, any of that?
I'm going to let Ken respond to that.
I was kind of looking past you at him as he's nodding, sorry.
Yes, there will be a kiosk in the front for grave location, and there'll also be an administrative office, preferably down towards the bottom of the entrance. A little bit higher, there'll be a maintenance building, and then there'll be an avenue of flags. If you look at the picture, the green picture without the yellow line, basically along that tree line up to the left side, there'll be a rotunda up at the top where the first 10 acres will be developed, and that rotunda is for the actual funeral services out of the weather, and then the burials will be closer to that.
Thank you. Thank you for answering
Thank
that.
you.
Based on quick math, it's over 76,520, Counselor, if all 4 developments are done, as far as how many would be allowed. That's not with any changes as it's being developed, but this definitely will meet the needs for a very long time. And is just something we need in our community, in my opinion. And so thanks for your leadership on this with Counselor Rolfing as well. Ken, you've been a huge part of this. I've gotten to know you over the years and really appreciate your heart and advocacy for this and for the veterans. It's great, even in the it's hard to say it's great when we're talking about a cemetery, but to honor those that have served and come before us is really a need in our community. So thank you for your leadership in this, and look forward to more as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As I stated, this has been, to date, the favorite project that I've worked on in my 4+ years. And I only wish that my father were here to see it as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, next,
Counselor Neitzer.
I'm going to make a motion to go into executive session to discuss the qualifications, competence, performance, character, or fitness of any public officer or employee or prospective public officer or employee. The term employee does not include any independent contractor pursuant to SDCL 1-25-2 sub 1.
Is there a second? There's been a motion to go into executive session. We'll take a roll call.
Councilmember Brecky?
Yes.
Erickson?
Yes.
Kylie?
Yes.
Neitzert?
Yes.
Selberg?
Yes.
Sol?
Yes.
Starr?
Yes.
Staley? Yes.
Passes unanimously. We'll go into executive session. We'll ask to clear the room.